we go. Good. So, give
Ladies
you
and
a
gentlemen.
quick shot at some of the crew. Everybody's hanging out. Um, yeah, super excited to have you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're super busy, especially with the big job and all that good stuff you got going on over there. But we would love to hear a little bit about you, where you're from. I think I know you were in Jersey. I don't know if you're born and raised Jersey.
So I'll give you the whole backstory and I'll explain why I was in Jersey. So in 2018, I had been working at that point for Disney, Marriott, and a couple other companies, and a job opportunity opened up in Jersey. So I decided to take the job opportunity, but the first few months of me being in Jersey working, I could not get my wife up to Jersey yet because she had a period of time she needed to transition out of her current job. So I'm sitting there by myself, making more money than I had ever made in my entire life, right? And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna start streaming. I see all these people, Tim the Tatman streaming. You know what? I'm gonna start streaming, and that way my wife can watch me play Fortnite with the homies, right? So that's how it all started. So we get it all set up. I'm streaming. All of a sudden, I'm starting to build an audience, and unintentionally building an audience, which is uncommon in streaming. So I was having a lot of fun with it, and I decided I was like, you know what? Again, I'm making. I took this massive promotion. I'm making more money than I know what to do with. Let me give back. So I started giving back to the community, people that like genuinely wouldn't have PC setups and stuff like that. I'd give back to within my own community. And so I did that for a little bit, and then I disappeared. Once my wife moved up, we got settled. I stopped streaming for a bit, and then in 2019, I kind of missed it. Right? I was like, that was fun. It was fun giving back. It was fun doing stuff. So I decided to come back. Did that again in 2019, and then life got very busy with work, and I had to step away from it again. Fast forward 2020, COVID hits. We get stuck inside, and the conversation comes up yet again. What do we do? Right? Like, do we should we stream again? We have the extra time. I'm working from home now, so it's like I'm waking up 10 minutes before I have to be in my first Teams meeting for the day. Like, I had a lot better work-life balance, so I started streaming again. But this time around, something was different. Something felt like I had to put more effort into it. So I hired a team, an editing team, and some other people around me, and through them, I ended up getting introduced to Monster D-Face, who is like the premier caster of Fortnite. He started showing me the ropes, helping me get involved in the scene. One thing led to another. I got my first casting gig at the end of 2020, and then the rest is history now.
Yeah, and so tell them, uh, now that you're over at Epic, now that you're full time, right?
So I'm contracted with everything that I do,
Uh
right?
huh.
So in this line of work, specifically with casting, there's a few positions like with Riot, for example, in League of Legends, where you can get a salary to be a caster, and you're actually signed to the organization. In my situation, I'm contracted. So I am there once they hit us up, whether it's like 2 weeks ahead of an event, a month ahead of an event. That's when we kind of get that notice. We sign the contract and we're involved. So it just depends, but contractor work seems to be consistent for me. So you could say full time, but without actually having that full time title, it's hard to say.
I got you. And so, talk about maybe where you started as a caster and now where you've ended up with Epic. Because that was always cool. Because when we met back at Garden State Esports at the last year in September, I know that you were doing tons of casting, but like this was the big job you were after, right?
So I had just gotten it when we met.
That's right. Okay.
So that's what it was. So basically, what had happened is I started November 2020. I had a few shows, and then December, January hits, which happens to all casters, and it just dies off. It's super slow because during that period of time, like the major brands, for example, like a Pizza Hut, which I just did a cup with them yesterday. Basically, Pizza Hut, like they spent all this money in preparation ahead of the holiday season. Now they have to take a step back. They spend less money in the scene, and less money goes to gaming. So usually becomes slower during that time. And then I actually stepped in with an org called Loot Boy, and myself and somebody's gun actually. We started casting for them, and it was literally just highlighting their players during FNCS on on their own channel, which was super cool. It was a great opportunity. And basically, during that time, I realized that these jobs weren't just going to find themselves. So I had to start going after it, right? I had to watch for the top production companies working in Fortnite. I had to start connecting with the people at the right positions within those different production companies, and getting a better understanding of how to put myself out there while still being very new. Because again, at that time, I'd only done a handful of shows, so I hadn't done much within the scene. So it's hard to argue that I provide a high level of value when I haven't shown too much, right? So through those connections, I started building a good reputation within the scene. One thing led to another, and I was like, I was head of, or one of the best. I don't want to say best. One of the most sought after casters for Play Versus. I was sought after then for DreamHack, and then literally the week after my first DreamHack, Epic hit me up, and Esports Engine, who was running production at that time, hit me up. They said, you know what, we want you to join the main broadcast and join NA West. So that's when I got that opportunity. But it really came from hard work and networking, trying to understand who works where and who makes the decisions with certain production companies that are within a specific game title, build those connections, and then show them why you have value for their productions.
And let's stay there too, because this is, even for me, as fascinating as it's rare that you find somebody operating at your level. The path that it takes to get to somebody to be so successful, a lot of times it's, there's a lot of twists and turns and stuff behind the scenes. Like, I never even thought about the best way to possibly find gigs is to go search for the production companies doing the events. In my mind, I'm going, find somebody who works at Epic, but they're not the ones necessarily putting on the events that need the casters. No. So start us maybe at the beginning. You're in my high school elective. You're lucky enough to have Mr. Aviles, the greatest teacher of all time, in the greatest class of all time, and you're a talented caster. So what is the order of operations? How do we go from casting, in our high school classroom to casting Fortnite at your level?
Well, right now, one of the things that's kind of open for the taking is the collegiate track. So looking at eFuse and what they're doing with their CCA brand is huge. They have Rocket League and Fortnite mainly right now, but they are branching out into other esports. So watching what they do and connecting with them would be a great first step, because they look for student casters. So if you're young, you're in high school, or you're just going into college and this is something you want to do, that's a great first step that unfortunately I didn't have the opportunity to do, right? I wouldn't be able to associate with them because they were more looking for student casters. Now I get to work with them, but it's obviously because of the level that I got to with Epic, and I can translate that over to help them push what they're trying to do.
And when you say bringing value to the company, I mean, obviously outside of being a talented caster, doing your homework and your prep work, which I want to talk about in a little bit, what is the value propositions that you approach with? Like, I'm a great caster and I can also bring my community, bring my followers, help you promote the event. Talk to me about, what are the other value props that we can explain to these companies?
Well, when you're smaller of a brand, the value is solely your talent and your understanding of professionalism when you come into a show. That's going to be first and foremost when you're a smaller brand. Now, once you grow your brand a bit, you have the opportunity to leverage, hey, I have 6,000 followers on Twitter, and I get about a 1 to 5% percentage engagement on my posts. So that's guaranteeing you that percentage of engagement on your show, right? So at 6,000 followers, which is roughly where I'm at right now, that is something that I can do, but to be honest, it's not something I can charge for. Now, once you get to larger scales, like an Oceantics, for example, who's pushing 200,000 followers on socials, to have him a part of an event, the way you structure your value is very, very different, right? Because obviously you have the talent, but then you have the brand backing, which, again, brands will pay big money for esports brands like an Oceantics just to be a part of it, let alone pay for the talent and skill that they have within casting. And then also, again, that professionalism. Because every production, you kind of have to treat it like a first impression. Go in there super ready to take on whatever the show is. Make sure you're prepping, which we'll talk about here in a second. Understanding the players that you're going to be talking about, understanding the scene that you're going to be focusing on, but also being professional in the way that you interact with the production crew. Despite it being gaming, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap. Just because it's gaming doesn't mean that it's not a business, right? Behind the scenes. So working with the production company, while sometimes it's a little bit more laid back, you still want to try to bring that level of professionalism that make them want to continue to bring you back.
So it sounds like things that we could do in high school, and we talked a little bit about this, is building a brand, making sure your socials all have the same look, all have the same feel to it. We talked about the type of content we put out, always kind of being positive, because that's also going to lead to the audience that you build, and you want a positive audience. And you sounded like somebody who gave back to your audience early. Maybe talk a little bit about that, is how you built up that audience and what kind of content you were pushing out. And I mean, that's really cool that I'm assuming you gave those PCs out to folks that were in the Twitch chat, probably from the beginning. Why do all that? And how can some of my kids who are just starting a Twitch channel, just starting a Twitter, I'm trying to get them on LinkedIn, stuff like that. Yeah. They're designing, logos and picking names they want to go by. How do we build all of that while we have, I think my youngest kid I have in my elective is a sophomore. How do we build all that over the next couple of years, so that way when we hit that space, we have the followers, we are ready to, have a brand, and people know, who Mike Marte is. They're ready to hire him right now.
Mm-hmm. So, multi-layered question. The one thing I will say, and starting with the consistency part, being consistent on every single platform is very crucial, but also being you is very important as well. And now in the casting scene, again, we talk about professionalism a lot. You have to be professional on socials as well, because if you're overtly negative or you're bashing other jobs you've done and stuff like that, new jobs are not going to want to take you. So a good example of this is I did an advertisement for another company this year, but the production company working on a Mio event saw it, and they brought me in for the Mio event because they saw what I did with somebody else. So that's another, and I played in the Mio event. I didn't even cast it, so I got to be a part of like the actual player base, but I wouldn't have had that opportunity and gotten the opportunity to run an ad through the Mio brand if I didn't do well with another brand going into that. So professionalism on socials and consistency on socials is very, very important. When you make content, you want to make content that's you. You do not want to force content, while you should obviously try to find something that can add value to an audience and maybe doesn't necessarily exist elsewhere. You also don't want to stray too far away from who you are as a person and what you enjoy doing. Because if you start creating content and your content is something you do not enjoy, it's just going to be miserable. It's going to be like any other day job, right? Like if I was like Mr. Beast, for example, when he first started, he said Logan Paul for 24 hours. I promise you, I will never make a video saying anything for 24 hours, because that would just be miserable, and that's not something I want to do, right? Now, that's not to say that this doesn't take hard work, but make sure that you're working hard towards something you enjoy doing and creating, other than just trying to do what's next or what you think is the right thing to do in that moment. Now, when it comes to branding and logos, obviously, logos are important, right? But also on socials, remember that you are the brand when it comes to social media and your channels, right? Now, the logo should be used to supplement you. So for me, for example, as a caster, the biggest thing I push on all my socials is my face, because I want people, when they click on Life with Panda, to know me, not just know that. But this is here to supplement everything that I do. So like in banners, for example, you'll see the logo. In some other stuff that I'm working on that I can't quite say yet, you'll see the logo and you'll see the stuff that supplement the actual face to the brand. But the most important thing when it comes to socials is having your face present. So super important, something I highly recommend when branding yourself. Now, when building a brand, for me, it did start out with giveaways. However, I don't necessarily recommend that track unless you have tons of money or you're ready to have people DM you, I want a free PC all the time, because that's what happened in the beginning of my career. I'll be honest. And fortunately, I've strayed away from that quite a bit now, and I've built my brand through high quality content, in my opinion, on every single social that I post on. So that's kind of elevated what I'm doing. But I think that's more important than finding like niche ways, like a giveaway, for example, to build a brand. Now, giveaways can supplement what you do if you want to support your community, things like that. However, you shouldn't use it too much as a tool to build an audience, because realistically, that audience isn't there for you; it's there for the giveaway. So supplement both, support your community with a giveaway every once in a while if that's what you want to do, but also try to find, again, unique ways to fill holes in whatever game title, whether it's esports, maybe it's just you're looking to fill a hole in the high school scene in general. Find a way to fill that hole through your content on every social platform. So, like Twitter, for example, create posts that talk about what your high school did, and maybe what other high schools can do to improve their programs. When you go to a social platform like TikTok, create like, here's quick steps to create a broadcast as a high school student. Like, there's so many things that you can do that provide value to an external audience that you have internally within this entire classroom that people don't necessarily realize. Like, you don't necessarily realize the value you have as a high school student until you talk to somebody that has no clue about anything that you do. Because then you realize, man, I actually do know what I'm doing here. I do have a good base and understanding of production, casting, and stuff like that. So, taking what you know and sharing that externally in social platforms will help you grow as well.
Awesome. And I have one more question in the streaming space, but I want to see if any of my folks have. Anybody have any questions for Panda about casting, how he got started, where he came from, what it's like, before we move to how he preps for the big shows? Do you have to go to college to cast?
No.
You do not.
Now, college, in my opinion, is important, and as we get closer and closer to esport being mainstream with like the NFL and things like that, we're going to see more esports courses and tracks open up. I just don't think there's enough right now that support casting specifically. There's stuff that support other avenues in esports, but right now casting is one of those things that you just don't see classes or courses taught on it yet.
Nice. Yeah.
How he began to like.
So, how did you land your first big, opportunity?
So my first big show was with FaZe Clan. I did a FaZe event it was with Practice Server, so Monster D facing them. But FaZe Clan saw the level of professionalism I had with another organization, Loop Boy, and saw some of the stuff that I was doing with them. And my name was thrown out there to be supported within that event. And that was the first big event that I did. It was a third-party event, but it was big. And again, a lot of my shows and a lot of my connections all come from that level of professionalism and courtesy to the people around me when I'm working with them.
Wonderful. Anybody else? How do you not get nervous when you cast?
Simple. It doesn't happen. So I think there's some high-level nerves that you can kind of toss to the side after practice in front of a camera, practice talking to the camera. I know it sounds silly, but you could literally turn on your camera, turn on OBS, hit record, and just start talking to your camera. And you could be talking about your day. It doesn't matter. Little things like that will help. Then take that to a stream. Turn on a stream, whether you have 10 people in there or 10,000 people in there. Talk to your camera. Have a good time. Streaming, in my opinion, helped me a lot with the on-camera work. And before that, I worked in public speaking and training within Disney and Marriott and some other companies. So that kind of was like a cheat code for me when it came into actually speaking on a camera. It was just the camera shyness that I had to get over, which streaming helped with that personally. But overall, I think if you are nervous, that's a good thing. It's because you care. And people that aren't nervous going into something, they lose sight of why they're doing it and how fortunate they are to be able to talk about video games for a career. So likely, if you're not nervous, You need to look inward and be like, okay, do I care enough about this, and why have I shifted away from that?
Yeah, that's a cool way to think about it. Is nerves mean you care? You want to do a good job and you care what people are thinking. I like that perspective. Anybody else? How do you not accidentally curse?
So for me, it's not as hard. I don't really keep it in my vocabulary outside of casting too much, right? And I think that's the big thing. What you bring in your daily vocabulary will appear in casting. So if you curse heavily outside of casting, there's a chance that you might slip up and say it publicly. That was one of the challenges I had when I was playing the game versus when I started casting. Because obviously, when you get frustrated, right, in a game, tensions are high. You may slip and say something, right? You have to start there,
Right.
because guess what? When you're playing a game, no one's paying attention, right? But when you're casting the game, you can have hundreds to thousands of people paying attention. So you need to be a little bit more cautious with what you say. But it'll come naturally once you really focus on not doing it.
What are the repercussions for something like that if you were to do it on air?
So I'll tell you this, with Epic specifically, and it's because of game rating and stuff. You can't say the word kill. You can only say elimination. And so if you say kill too many times, you could be removed. Same thing applies with cursing. If you step out of line with what you're saying and following those guidelines, you could end up losing that spot.
I mean, I would even imagine with your contract with Epic, there's probably stuff in there about that.
100%.
So there we go. It's a lifestyle change. Shawan? That's a good question. So are you allowed to have a bias while casting? And if you do, how do you control it, or how do you be an unbiased caster?
So, yes and no. If you, like, let's say you're a part of an org, right? Like, let's say I'm FaZe Clan, and all I want to talk, now I get on broadcast and all I'm talking about is the FaZe players, right? That's a problem. But if you go into it and you're like following this team and you believe this team can do really well in whatever the event is, and you're hyping this team up the whole time, while that's slight bias because you're hyped for them, it's also supporting the player that's on the screen, so it's not necessarily looked at in the same way.
I hear. And that's like, I think it was your period. No, it might have been fourth period, but remember we were watching some of the casting and they kept going back to booga, 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 booga. So, you know, I guess there's something to be said, like you're saying, if there's a team, if there's a player, would popularity among the community factor into that, right? Like Booga, we were watching from a couple of years ago when he was, you know, I guess one of the biggest names and had maybe just won or was going to win that cash cup. Following the team or the player that's most likely to do well, or maybe is most popular, is that something streamers tend to do?
So, some advice here, and you can kind of take this as you will. When you enter into a show, you pick a few teams that you really think can do well and focus on. It could be you want to focus on them because they have a massive brand and the community is really rallying behind them. Or you can focus on them because you think their skill level tops those that they're competing against. But as you go through the first half of the competition, you have to start really paying attention to the leaderboard and focusing who's in the top 10, who's in the bubble outside of the top 10, and the impact of each player or each team within that top 10 going down and who can actually end up taking their spot because they went down. So using the leaderboard is a huge tool in casting to keep up with what's actually happening in the games, but also creating a narrative and a story around the players in front of you.
Yeah. Oh, and narrative is important too. That's one of the things that we talked about. But we were also, you know, one of the things I showed one of the classes is we're watching something in Fortnite and we were looking at color versus play-by-play. Yeah. And especially, you know, early in the match for Fortnite or, you know, early in a series for like Rocket League, it's much more color. And then as the, you know, the big culmination starts to come, who's going to win, Battle Royale, that kind of stuff, it starts to turn more play-by-play. While we were watching, it might have been in some of the stuff that you sent me or somebody else's, I was showing them the elimination feed up in the top left corner. And I said, look, you know, there's 30 people have been eliminated in the first 8 minutes, and there hasn't been any single play-by-play. You know, so there's people who don't get camera time. There's people who don't get a single shout out. So it makes sense that that leaderboard, that team that you think is going to do well before you go in, winds up becoming the focus of the cast.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
quickly to add to that, the observing team behind the scenes are just as responsible as you as a caster to tell the story.
Mm.
So if they're not providing you with the right POVs and the teams that are really able to make a difference in a competition, it becomes harder as a caster to fully tell a story, and then you miss perspectives that otherwise could be super impactful to the overall like event.
And just confirm for me, because this is a question I had for some of the kids the other day and I couldn't answer. As a caster, you have no control over what you see or what the observer does. There's not even a way for you to talk to them while they're observing.
Depends on the event.
Mm-hmm.
So for a big event like an FNCS, for example, we can go into it letting them know teams that we want to pay attention to. Throughout the event, between games, while the analysts are talking as a caster, you can then share teams that you want to focus on off spawn. And then outside of that, you kind of have to rely on them to figure out what's going on. Because I could say that I want to see Booga and Miro the whole time, but if Booga and Miro aren't fighting from zone 2 to zone 6, then it's kind of boring, right? So if we're focusing on a team that's not doing anything, then as a caster, you have to kind of fill a lot, and then as a viewer, you're not getting to see the full picture of everything going on because there's action always going on.
Gotcha. And so where I want to spend the rest of our time is kind of talking about how you prepare. I was showing, like, if you help me out on Twitter as you always do. I got a bunch of screenshots and pictures from casters who were showing their notes and how they do their notes, and everybody has their own way of doing it. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but I think there's a right or maybe wrong way to prepare. Can you talk about how going into a big event, especially in Fortnite, where I think it's a little bit tougher to cast because there's so much going on, how do you get ready for a big Fortnite event? What is your prep work like? What are your notes like? What categories? And how are you getting enough color to fill that time?
Yeah. So there's a few things to this. Everyone takes notes differently. And yes, there are notes in casting. The big thing for me specifically is I'm integrated into the actual community. So I'm following storylines every single day. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I'm not paying attention to what's happening, because I also do a podcast with Monster and SBG. So we need to know everything that's happening within the scene regardless, right? So we're following leaderboards and Elite Cups and everything else that's happening, not just showing up on the day and then trying to take notes ahead of time to prep for this. We're always kind of taking those notes mentally going into a show. Now, for me, what I do is I'll take notes about specific teams that we're going to talk about as an analyst. And then as a caster, I'll take notes based on my previous show. So what I do is I find crutch words and things that I said that I didn't like, or maybe I said too much. And I find ways or alternate ways to say those exact same things. So that's one of the big things that I take as far as notes go. Now, for someone like Resub, for example, who I'm doing the show with actually later today, he has an Excel sheet with every single player, and he has notes about every single player from every single season, which is a lot, right? So there's two spectrums to this. There's someone that pays close attention and takes like just small notes ahead of an event, like me. And then there's somebody like Resub who's taking what could genuinely be a book about the history of Fortnite players in an Excel sheet and his level of notes. And then there's everything in between. Another good example, Kelly, who she plays Fortnite, but she doesn't have as much interaction in the competitive scene. So she's like the perfect example of something that you were more like hinting towards, where she takes pretty, not heavy notes, but she goes through and she gets notes about some of the best prospects coming into the tournament. She finds some stats about them and has those ready to convey when the opportunity presents itself. That's going to be the variety of different note taking. Whereas, like, again, for me, I know most of those stats because SPG, myself, Monster, we're studying this stuff throughout the week anyway. So I don't necessarily take the same level of notes because I'm in it versus someone like a Kelly who's less in it.
And would you say generally notes are done digitally, or they're done paper and written or printed out, or what do you kind of see?
It's preference. Primarily digitally from the people that I've worked with and myself. But sometimes I'll take sticky notes and I'll stick sticky notes to the screen. Like if it's a virtual event, it's sticky notes to a screen. If it's an in-person event, it's digital because it has to either be on a tablet that I
Mm,
can like quickly read if I'm on stage, or quickly read behind the scenes and then go back. Whereas like at home, I can stick a bunch of sticky notes on my monitor and be like, "Yep, I don't want to say that today, so I'm gonna look down at that as I'm casting to make sure I did not say that." Like there's a different level of note taking when it comes to it, but primarily digital from my experience.
gotcha. That's a good question. So when you're casting, how do you keep pace with the play-by-play when there's all this action?
So that's a tough one. So with play by play and color, right? Each caster will find that they feel more comfortable in one over the other, right? Shy Wager, for example, is an incredible play by play caster. He can do color commentary and he can do it well, but he feels more comfortable with play by play, right? Jacob PR, same thing. Me, I'm more a color commentary because I like to build the story around things. When you, as a caster, when you start to take a story narrative, it is your responsibility to take that story from start to finish. Now, if you cannot finish it because the fight is taking too long, or it's kind of going a little bit out of hand into something you really can't control, then you have to find a way to like close the narrative and pass to your co-partner so that they can continue the story, or they can start to tell the story from the other perspective of what's happening on the screen.
And can you dive into that more? Because that's one of the things. So I actually, when we were starting casting academy here, I showed them the 7 different storylines. You know that they say every book is made out of. You know,
Yeah.
you have the underdog story, right? I'm sure you've seen a tragedy comedy. Walk us through how you see that, right? You've mentioned storyline and narratives a few times, and I happen to think they're super important when you go through. Talk to us about that. How you find a narrative, how you tell the story while you're casting. What narratives do you often use? And I think a big one for uh, us is, well, we maybe don't have an obvious narrative because we're kind of like just in class, maybe playing each other, playing a school, stuff like that. Maybe some narratives that we could touch on.
Yeah, so from a talent perspective, we actually try to use predictions to start the story, right? So that's us making an educated guess who we think is going to do well, right? But then we can take that and we have more or less a banter about it amongst our co-caster, amongst the analyst, and we can build a story off that. Now, obviously, if our prediction is not doing well, let's just say they're at the bottom of the leaderboard, you don't want to be overtly negative that they're not doing well, right? On a broadcast, because you still want to try to spread as much positivity in the show as possible. So you'll talk about like, man, they're just not picking up the pace. Like, could they make a comeback in the second half? But then you have to again go back to the leaderboard and use that leaderboard to build your story. So like the underdog, right? Look for who on the leaderboard you had no expectations for going into this. Highlight them. Talk about the expected player who is there in the top of the 10 of the leaderboard doing well. Talk about that, right? Just that narrative of, oh, as expected, Buga's right there in the top 3. We've seen this time and time again. And then again, use supporting details and facts from their history as a player to make it that much more exciting for the viewer to consume and understand, because that's what it comes down to. You're a storyteller as a caster, whether it's play-by-play or commentary. You're there painting a story about what's happening, and as much supporting details that you can bring to that story, whether it is an underdog story or that as expected story like we just talked about, it's up to you to bring every little detail into it. So, for example, how many eliminations did they have in a round 3? Now that they're going into round 4, what was their average placement? Maybe they had a slow start and then they picked up in the second half. Talk about that.
I love it. How do you make it not sound repetitive?
That's the hardest part. You have to, for me, like I said before, it's those taking notes and finding different ways to say the same thing. Because while, like in Fortnite, for example, there are like very specific terms for everything. So if I'm saying rotate every single time that someone's moving around the map, it becomes repetitive, right? And so people are listening to the same thing over and over again, and it tends to get a little boring. So finding different like alternative ways to say the same thing. All right, now they're moving left. Now they're rotating left. Now they're pushing away. Now they're like find different ways to say the same thing, and you will be golden as a caster.
There you go. So Panda, I heard, have a thesis prediction on who you think's going to win, supporting facts, figures, using synonyms. This is getting dangerously close to an English lesson. So I think it's time that we have to let you go, sir. I know you're busy. These guys got to get to class, and we're getting a little too close to English class here, sir.
Yeah, no, of course.
But we appreciate you. We appreciate your time. We know you're super busy. We would love to talk to you again. Some of the kids were even wondering if we put together our own little in-house match in our little arena that we have here. If you would cast with some of them, if you would, do some cool stuff with them. So, yeah, we'll hook it up. You know what I mean? We'll have some, we'll do, we'll figure it out. But maybe have you come back and actually do some casting live with my kids. That'd be really cool. But I appreciate you, sir. I appreciate you always helping out with Garden State Esports. Anything I've ever needed, you've been there. You're the man, dude. I appreciate you.
Yeah, try my best. Thank you guys.
All right, I got
If you guys think of anything else, tell them to send me a message.
Absolutely. I got a pork roll, egg and cheese with your name on it next time you're in Jersey. Let me know.
I was about to say, man, I can't lie.
All right, bud. Take it easy. Thank you.
Take care.